And the big question, realistically, do you think that President-elect Trump will be able to abolish the Department of Education? Hey everyone, it's Tatiana from EdTrust, and I'm here with
Reid.
Reid is our Director of Government Affairs, and he wrote a viral blog on why we need the Department of Ed. And we have a lot of questions today, so let's just get right into it.
Sounds good.
If the Department of Ed is abolished, who will be affected the most?
Well, I mean, it's hard to find someone whose life hasn't been impacted by education in some way, so you could really say it'll have an impact on everyone that is living in America. However, given the programs that the department administers and its mission, certainly students from low-income backgrounds and students of color, disabled students, students who might be homeless or in foster care, would all be directly negatively impacted by abolishing the department.
What does the Department of Education fund?
So Congress funds a whole host of programs that the Department of Education is in charge of. Chief among them is Title I of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And essentially that is a chunk of money that goes to schools serving students from low-income backgrounds. Many of those students are students of color, but not all. Many of those schools are in both urban and rural areas. And that's a program that's upwards of $18 billion a year. So that's a tremendously large and important program that the department is in charge of. It also administers the Pell Grant program, which allows close to 8 million students from low-income backgrounds to attend college every year. Those are the two largest programs, but there are several others that I'm sure we'll touch on that are all equally important, that reach out to student parents, that help educate disabled students, and do a whole host of other activities for the benefit of people attending school. It also has other functionalities about enforcing civil rights laws, collecting important data and information, all of which isn't replicated anywhere else in the federal government.
So what will this mean for families who benefit from the IDEA Act?
Yeah, I mean, eliminating the department, I think, would have calamitous effects on folks who have disabled students and their families, are trying to, I know, you have a follow-up question about IEPs, individual education plans, and 504s. I think, we saw a lot of strain during the pandemic in particular. Given the dislocation of students from school, they were still learning, but learning at home, and how to have those individual educational plans transfer over. So removing these resources, eliminating the department, eliminating expertise, could have a really, really negative impact on the ability of disabled students to get the free and appropriate education that is mandated by federal law in IDEA.
So does this mean like IEPs and 504s will be completely eliminated?
Well, I think, some of the proposals to get rid of the department talk about moving these things elsewhere or shuttling them. I don't think there's a push to repeal IDEA, but that said, again, if you're eliminating the specialized office that's dealing with this, or you're moving into another part of the government where folks in that other area haven't worked on this is somewhat of a extraneous thing to them, or something that's a new mission, and not funding, the hiring of new people, not funding the transfer process. There's no doubt that there will be less guidance coming from the department, less oversight of individual states that have a huge role in obviously helping design these plans with parents and educators, but also making sure that those are being put in place appropriately. And again, there are already well-documented challenges within the system. So breaking this up, moving it around, is not focusing on the problem, right? It's diverting attention and diminishing resources and capacity to help combat the original issue.
What role does the Department of Education play in advancing higher ed affordability and accessibility?
Quite a bit. I mentioned, obviously, the Pell Grant program, which is, again, another program with years, decades worth of bipartisan support. But even beyond that, they administer the Federal Work Study program, which can reach upwards of 1 million students a year. They administer things like C Campus, which is specifically designed to build that capacity for student parents, which are anywhere between 20 to 25% of a student population every single year. There's a larger amount of what's called quote, non-traditional students, but the average age of a college student is 26. So you have a lot of people at different parts of life that there are higher ed programs designed to facilitate them going back to school, or even starting school later in life. So the department is in charge of facilitating all of these opportunities, and they also do that through federal student aid. So there is a loan program where you have set interest rates. The federal government lends directly. They made that change in 2010, and were able to streamline that process, and also provide income-based repayment options and more generous options for things like public service loan forgiveness that allow people to pay their debt off over time.
If the department is abolished, how will that be impacted?
I mean, again, there's a lot of talk about what this means in abolishing the department. I don't think there's not a serious push to eliminate all of that, which I articulated. But again, it's okay, well, we're going to take that financial, the FSA aspect, and throw that to Treasury. Treasury has a lot of other priorities, right? And just think about what this means from a practical perspective. Less oversight. There's an enforcement wing within FSA that is trying to police bad behavior. From whether it's servicers not doing their job, getting information to students, which is well documented, over a series of years, or just preventing outright fraud or people misleading individuals to take advantage of the aid that they access. For me, making that an afterthought or removing those resources is going to have negative effects. And it also, from a larger perspective, you're just going to have less attention paid to education as a whole.
And the big question, realistically, do you think that President-elect Trump will be able to abolish the Department of Education?
It's hard for me to see 60 votes in the United States Senate for that. Quite frankly, it's hard for me to see a narrow majority in the House voting for that as well. If you look at some of the broader changes that have been proposed, specifically through House votes, right? So you had a vote in March of 2023 that would have turned Title I mentioned what that was, into a voucher program. And that only got 113 votes, right, in a conservative majority House. I think beyond that, you have several appropriations votes that would have cut federal student aid, that would have cut Title I. These amendment votes all failed and they got around anywhere 70, 80, 100 votes. So you're not even seeing a consensus among conservatives, like this is what we want to do, or this is what we want to include. There have been some House spending proposals that would have dramatically cut Title I, that I think are very, very bad ideas. But when the rubber met the road on some of these votes, you're not seeing the level of support that you might think from the rhetoric around we need to get rid of the department, or we need to get rid of all these things, because ultimately these programs do have value and they are delivering, resources to students, educators, districts, and states that they all need and use. So I think, I don't see that happening. It doesn't mean that there can't be changes made through the executive branch. The department is created by a law. And within that law, there are specific positions that are statutorily created, but there are some that aren't, right? And there's offices that are statutorily mandated, and there's some that aren't. So ultimately, whoever ends up being the secretary, the administration will have the choice to streamline, eliminate, however you want to frame it, but they could restructure some aspects of the department.
Well, thank you for talking to us. Make sure you check out his blog on our website, and thank you so much.